Hello everyone, I hope you're having a beautiful day. Today we're going to explore a gentle new beginning, a single key, a few simple papers, and how Diep and little Nhi open their small home so James can start over with calm meals, shared chores, and even a tiny windowsill garden. If this kind of warm, quiet story brings you peace, don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes. For a long moment after the dishes are cleared, the three of them just sit there, caught in the soft pool of light from the kitchen lamp, as if the whole world has narrowed down to this one small table and the single key resting in the middle of it. James keeps his gaze on that key like it's the first star after a storm, and every now and then his hand drifts toward it and then pulls back again, as if he's still not sure he's allowed to touch something that means home instead of office or duty. Diep watches him quietly, elbows on the worn wood, fingers linked, her shoulders relaxed on purpose because she knows if she tenses up, he will too. Being a single girl raised by a single mom taught her this quiet art of making a room feel safe without saying very much. "You know," she says at last, voice low and easy, "keys are not that complicated. They open, they close. The hard part is deciding where you want them to work." Nhi, who has been drawing little hearts and stick people on the back of an old electric bill, pops her head up and nods like a tiny philosopher. "This key is only for here," she declares firmly. "Not for the bad building, not for the angry man, only for us. And for soup." James actually smiles at that, just a little, and his shoulders drop a fraction of an inch. "Only for soup, huh?" he says, and Nhi giggles, in the soft clink of a spoon against a bowl and the quiet ticking of the clock on the wall. You might find yourself watching along and wondering if you were sitting at this table. Would you feel your heart settle a bit too? Or would you still be holding your breath out of habit? Does comfort come quickly for you? Or does it take time to trust it again after people have let you down? He finally reaches out, picks up the key, and the metal is warmer than he expected, as if it's been absorbing the small heat of their hope all evening. Diep slides a thin stack of simple papers toward him. Nothing official looking, just a lined notebook page folded in half with her neat handwriting on it. "If you want, this can be your room until you're ready for whatever comes next. We share food, we share light, we share chores. We don't share guilt for other people's choices." Underneath, a silly little signature line and a smiley face that Nhi insisted on adding. "It's not a contract," Diep says, watching his eyes move over the words. "Just a promise between people who live under the same roof." He thinks of all the papers he's signed in his life. Long contracts with unread clauses, cold memos, reports with his name printed like a stamp, and then looks at this one, homemade and slightly crooked, and feels something sting behind his eyes. It's funny how a simple note from a kitchen table can pierce deeper than any letterhead. He clears his throat. "Chuck, if I sign this?" he asks, trying to sound light. "Does that mean I'm in charge of taking out the trash? Or is that a separate agreement?" Diep smiles, and you can almost hear older women watching this scene think, yes, humor is sometimes the only bridge from pain to peace. "Trash duty comes with the room," she says. "Non-negotiable." He signs his name slowly, not adding his father's surname, just James. And when he puts the pen down, something in his chest feels not fixed, but slightly less broken. Nhi leans over the table, eyes shining. "Now you belong to this table," she says solemnly. "If you ever feel sad, you have to sit here until it goes away. That's another rule." Maybe you've had a table like that in your life. Or maybe you're wishing you did. Does the thought of a calm, ordinary table where no one raises their voice and everyone takes their time sound like something your heart would vote yes or no to? Does this table feel calm? Yes, no. After they tucked the little papers back into the envelope and put the key on a small hook by the door, a hook that used to hang Diep's mother's old scarf, life moves in the way it always does, with small, practical motions. There's a bit of rice stuck at the bottom of the pot, and the sink is slow to drain again. These aren't big problems, but when you've had a hard day, even a clogged sink can feel like the last straw, can't it? Diep rolls up her sleeves and laughs softly. "Well," she says, "one more thing to fix." James moves beside her without being asked, taking the dish towel from her hand. "Let me," he insists gently. "I may not know much about feelings yet, but I know how to argue with a drain." While he fiddles under the sink with an old wrench they probably should have replaced years ago, she wipes the table in slow circles, the same way her single mom used to do after long days at the market, pausing now and then to straighten the salt jar or tap her fingers to a tune only she remembers. She catches herself thinking of her mother's advice. If you can't fix the world, at least keep your table clean and your kettle ready. And wonders if somewhere out there, her mother would be glad to see this strange little family forming in her old kitchen. In the background, Nhi hums to herself, carefully peeling labels off glass jars they plan to use for a tiny windowsill garden. She lines them up on the sill, one by one, and asks out loud, "Do you think green onions like this window? Or should we give them the other one?" It's a small question, but there's something hopeful in it. Choosing where to grow things, even on a sill only big enough for a few jars. You might find yourself choosing along with her in your mind. Would you pick the sunny side, or the side that gets a softer light? The blue jar, or the beige one? The one closest to the kettle, or the one near the radio? When the water finally swirls down the drain with a satisfying gurgle, James sits back on his heels and wipes his hands on his jeans. "There," he says. "It just needed someone to talk to it nicely." Diep hands him a clean towel, and in that simple motion, there's an entire language. "Thank you for helping. Thank you for staying. Thank you for choosing this room instead of running away." "Tomorrow," she says, "if you feel up to it, we can stop by the little shop down the street for a small bag of soil. It's cheap, and these jars are ready. My mom used to say if you can keep one green thing alive on your windowsill, you'll never feel completely alone." James nods slowly, picturing the jars, the soil, the thin green lines pushing up one day. "Green onions, huh?" he says. "Not roses?" "Onions are more honest," Diep replies. "You can cook with them." She doesn't say it out loud, but you can see it in the way she looks at him. She's choosing useful hope, not fancy promises that wilt. Later, when Nhi's teeth are brushed and her small socks are tucked under her pillow for the morning, she calls James into her room. The paper heart she made earlier is taped above her bed, 3 wobbly figures holding hands. "Do you like it?" she asks. "I didn't have the right color for your shirt, so I used green. Green is for things that grow." He stands in the doorway, feeling unexpectedly moved by 3 childish shapes. "I like it," he says. "A lot. If you ever feel like you don't belong anywhere," she adds, already half under her blanket, "you can look at this and remember you belong to this picture. It's not big, but it's ours." How many times in your own life have you wished someone would say those words when you were lost? Come back. You belong to this picture, this kitchen, this chair. When he finally steps into the little room that is now, officially, his, he notices that Diep has already put a folded blanket at the foot of the mattress, and an old lamp on a crate beside it. The light is soft, not harsh, the way hospital lights were earlier that day. On the crate is one more thing, a small note in her handwriting. If you wake up and your thoughts are too loud, there is always tea, no explanation needed. He sits on the mattress and holds the note for a while, feeling the weight of the day settle into his bones, but also, strangely, feeling held by something new. Through the thin wall, he can hear the soft murmur of Diep washing the last cup, the light creak of the kitchen window as she opens it just a bit to let the night air in, the tiny clink as she sets the key back on its hook. The world outside is still full of unresolved things. Angry words, complicated fathers, unanswered questions. But in this small apartment, the evening closes gently, like a book laid down with care. Before he closes his eyes, he whispers a promise into the dark. Not sure if he's promising it to himself, to them, or to the version of him that heard, "You are not my son," and is still bleeding somewhere inside. Tomorrow, I'll get up. I'll help with the jars. I'll sit at the table. I'll try. It's not a grand oath, not a vow to conquer anything, just a quiet intention to keep showing up. And if you've lived long enough, you know that sometimes those are the only promises that truly change a life. One washed dish and one shared key at a time. The morning comes in quietly, with a stripe of pale light across the little room and the faint clatter of cups from the kitchen. And for a moment, James forgets where he is. He reaches out, expecting the cold edge of a polished nightstand, the vibration of an early work email, the distant hum of air conditioning, and instead, his fingers brush a rough wooden crate, a soft old blanket, and the small note about tea he left unfolded beside the lamp. Then he hears Nhi's unmistakable giggle and Laitu Diep's low, sleepy shh, the neighbors, and it all comes back, the key on the hook, the simple papers on the table, the way she said, "We still have each other." He sits up slowly, feeling that strange mix of heaviness and relief that comes after a very hard day you somehow survived. And when he opens the door, he finds the little home already moving in its own rhythm. Kettle steaming, radio murmuring an old song, Nhi sitting cross-legged on a chair too big for her, dipping her bread into her milk like it's the most important job in the world. Diep looks up from the pan where she's frying a tiny bit of leftover rice into a crisp pancake, her hair twisted into a loose knot. No makeup, just warmth. "Good morning," she says. "We weren't sure if you'd want to sleep in or join the chaos." He rubs his eyes and smiles. "I think I'd rather be awake for the chaos," he answers. She slides a plate toward him without asking what he wants, because there isn't really a menu here. There is rice, an egg split 3 ways, a few slices of cucumber, and the way she sets it down in front of him makes it feel like a feast anyway. "We have 2 kinds of tea," she adds, gesturing toward the counter where a chipped blue tin and a plain beige jar sit side by side. Stronger and softer. "My mom always said you choose for your day. Today you want the one that tells you to get up and fight, or the one that tells you it's okay to go slow." He looks from one to the other, thinking of all the years he never got to choose his own pace, and surprises himself by pointing to the softer one. "Gentle today, maybe stronger tomorrow," he says, and you might catch yourself answering that same question in your own mind. Would you reach for strong tea or soft, loud radio or quiet? The part of you that wants to rush out and fix everything, or the part that wants to move carefully and let the heart catch up? The everyday obstacle of the day shows up almost immediately in the form of a plain white envelope slid under the door. It's not dramatic, just another piece of paper in a life that's been full of them. But when Diep bends to pick it up and sees the familiar logo in the corner, her eyes narrow with a quiet, protective focus. "It's from the landlord," she says, opening it with firm fingers. For a second, you might hold your breath along with them, expecting bad news, but this time the obstacle is smaller and kinder. A notice about the water being off for a few hours next week. A reminder about the stairway light they all promised to help change. And a handwritten note at the bottom. "Heard about your mom's surgery. Hope she's recovering well. If your guest needs time before paying full rent, we can talk." Neighbor kindness, tucked into a bill. Diep exhales and chuckles. "See?" she says. "Not every paper is a trap." James shakes his head in disbelief. "Your landlord writes nicer emails than my old HR manager," he murmurs. "I'll go talk to him later. I don't want you carrying more than you already do." She looks at him over the rim of her mug. "We carry this together," she says. "That's the whole point." As the morning stretches on, they slip into home routines that don't look like much from the outside, but feel like steps toward a new niche they're making for themselves. Nhi puts her crayons in an old biscuit tin and proudly labels it RT. Diep opens the window and shakes out the small rug over the balcony, scattering a bit of yesterday's crumbs to the pigeons, and James finds himself standing in front of the tiny closet with a small stack of folded clothes, deciding which hangers to borrow and laughing softly when he realizes he's overthinking something as simple as where to put his shirts. "You can use those," Diep calls from the kitchen, nodding toward 3 wooden hangers she's lined up neatly. "They were my mother's. She used to say they were our good luck hangers because she hung her nicest blouse on them when she went to ask for jobs." The memory turns the air a little tender, and you can almost see another woman in this same small hallway, young and determined, smoothing her hair and telling her daughter, "We may be just a single mom and a single girl, but we will walk into every room like we belong there." James touches the hanger gently, feeling the echo of that courage, and decides, without fully realizing it, that if he ever gets another interview, he will wear a shirt from this closet rather than anything left in his old apartment. After breakfast, the 3 of them make a simple plan. Diep will go to the corner shop for a small bag of soil and a handful of green onion bulbs. James will stay back with Nhi and sort through a thin folder of documents he brought with him. Some he needs to keep, some he's finally ready to let go of. It's a quiet keys and papers moment, but it holds more weight than it seems. Sitting at the kitchen table while Nhi draws beside him, he spreads everything out. A work ID card with his father's company logo, an old access card that no longer opens any doors, a formal letter full of words like termination and performance review, and, tucked between them, a photograph he doesn't remember packing. A picture of himself at 12, grinning awkwardly on a bicycle, one hand raised mid-wave. "Is that you?" Nhi asks, craning her neck. "You look like you're about to fall off." "I probably did," he replies, smiling. "I was always trying to go faster than I was ready for." He holds the picture up, looking from that boy to the man at the table, and feels a quiet promise start to form. Maybe, this time around, he can learn to move at a speed that doesn't leave him bruised. Some papers he tucks back into the envelope. Some he folds and, after a long pause, drops into the recycling bag. Letting them go doesn't erase the past, but it softens its grip, sheet by sheet. When Diep returns, cheeks a little pink from the walk and a small bag of soil cradled like something precious, the apartment smells faintly of toasted bread and possibility. They gather at the windowsill, 3 mismatched jars in a row, and Nhi takes her role very seriously. "We have to talk to them nicely," she says as she presses a bulb into the damp soil. "Plants grow better when they know they're wanted. That's what Ms. Hoa downstairs told me. You might remember someone like Ms. Hoa in your own life, the neighbor who always had a spare onion or an extra story, the kind of woman who knew how to make something out of almost nothing." Diep, remembering her own single mom leaning over a different windowsill in another tiny flat, hears her mother's voice in her mind. If you can keep one little thing alive, you can keep going. They plant 3 jars, one for soup, as Nhi insists, one for omelets, and one for luck. Watching the bulbs disappear under the soil, James feels a pang of uncertainty. What if they don't grow? What if they wither like so many of his attempts at building a life? But then he catches the way Diep's hand rests lightly on the windowsill, steady and patient, and decides to give the onions and himself the benefit of the doubt. The everyday obstacle in the afternoon arrives disguised as something small, a torn grocery bag at the worst possible moment. They're coming back from the store together, arms full of tea, a bag of rice, and a few vegetables, when the thin plastic gives way and a potato bounces down the stairwell like a runaway marble. Diep's first instinct is to curse under her breath. James's is to laugh. "Wait, I've got it!" he calls, chasing the potato like a clumsy soccer player. Nhi squeals with delight, the tension snapping like a weak string, and by the time they reach their floor, they're all out of breath and a little giddy. "That bag gave up faster than I used to at my first kitchen job," James jokes, tying a knot in the torn handle. "We'll use the cloth ones next time," Diep says. "And my mom always said, buy something once if you can and wash it forever." She would be scolding me right now for trusting this cheap plastic. There it is again, that single mom memory weaving itself into the present, turning a small annoyance into a moment of connection between then and now. Back in the apartment, as they put away the groceries and start a simple meal, rice, sautéed greens, a bit of egg, and maybe one day soon, those green onions. They fall into an easy rhythm. James rinses, Diep chops, Nhi sets the table with serious care, lining up the chopsticks and spoons as if she's hosting royalty. "Why do we always eat here and not in front of the TV?" Nhi asks suddenly. Diep pauses, smiling. "Because my mother believed tables remember things," she explains. "But if you laugh here, the wood holds it. If you cry, it holds that too. If you keep coming back, the table becomes thicker with all the meals and talks and little silences. And no matter how hard the day is, when you sit down, you remember you've survived before." James looks at the worn surface, runs his palm along the grain, and thinks about all the glossy conference tables he's sat at that never knew his real heart. "Then I guess I'm glad this table is remembering me now," he says softly. As evening comes and the first dinner as a household of 3 simmers on the stove, there's a gentle sense that something is settling. Not everything, not yet, but enough. They might not talk about fathers or court cases or painful words tonight. Instead, they talk about which neighbor's cat is the loudest, whether you'd rather have cookies or tea before bed, whether it's better to stay in a life that looks good on the outside or leave and build one that actually feels like yours. The questions float in the air like soft invitations. In your own story, did staying bring you peace? Or did leaving finally let you breathe? When they sit down to eat, James automatically waits for someone else to start. Old habits die slowly, but Nhi nudges his elbow. "You go first," she says. "New people have to say what they're grateful for today. That's the rule." He blinks, a little startled. Gratitude feels like a big word right now. After everything. Still, he clears his throat. Today, he says slowly, I'm grateful that when one door closed, hard, another one opened, and it wasn't a fancy office door with my name on it. It was this, a door with a squeaky hinge, a key on a hook, and people who actually want me to walk through. Diep's eyes shine, but she just nods and adds her own. I'm grateful we have enough rice for one more bowl whenever someone shows up at our table. Nhi chimes in with, I'm grateful Uncle James fixed the sink and chased the potato, and their small, mismatched chorus drifts out the open window like a blessing. Somewhere beyond the apartment, unresolved things still wait. Difficult conversations, old hurts, the question of what kind of work James will do next, whether his past will follow him like a shadow or finally stay put. But in this little pocket of time, the next step feels simple and clear. One more meal together. One more morning with tea and green onions. One more day of choosing, on purpose, to be a family even if the papers say something else. And as you listen, you might find yourself quietly looking toward your own next small step, wondering what gentle beginning could still be waiting in your kitchen, on your windowsill, or at a table that's been patiently holding your stories all along. After hearing "You are not my son," James doesn't go back to an empty room. He goes to Diep's tiny apartment, where a new beginning starts with one simple key and a few handwritten house rules on kitchen paper. At the worn wooden table, single girl Diep and little Nhi fold him gently into their routines. Shared dinners, slow tea, and honest laughter. They clean out a small storage room to make his space, argue kindly with a clogged sink, and set up a few glass jars on the windowsill to grow green onions for soup, omelets, and luck. Along the way, neighbor kindness appears in a landlord's note. An old memory of Diep's single mom quietly guides her choices, and everyday mishaps. A torn grocery bag, a runaway potato, turn into small, healing moments. Piece by piece, this found family starts building a calm life together.